I'm Amy Cherry. This local news is a service of Flagler County's Toyota dealer, Beaver Toyota, here to wow ya.
It's time to do something here. We consider it to be an emergency situation.
Flagler County plans to file a lawsuit against Clerk of Court Tom Bexley within 48 hours if he doesn't clear additional space in the courthouse for the sheriff's office. Vice Chair of the Flagler County Commission, David Sullivan.
Because we've had no viable communication with the clerk's office as to what they are willing or not willing to do. So far, it's been basically a case of no response, and therefore, we feel like this is the next step.
Prior to the lawsuit threat, Bexley had said on WNZF he had no intention of following the county's demands, saying that any additional space in his office for the sheriff would compromise his own operations. The county and the sheriff are against renting additional space for sheriff's office employees, saying it could cost taxpayers up to $1 million for 2 years, as a new operations center is being built in Palm Coast.
This portion of Flagler's Morning News brought to you by the Daytona Beach International Airport, Delta Airlines nonstop to Atlanta, and now nonstop service to New York City via American Airlines.
Bunnell officials are responding after deciding to close down a cold weather shelter. John R. King has the details.
The sheltering tree, located at the First United Methodist Church, was recently denied a special exception request for its continued operation by the Planning, Zoning, and Appeals Board. That followed numerous complaints from residents about drug and alcohol abuse being committed by the shelter's tenants. The main issue, though, according to Bunnell City Manager Alvin Jackson, was that the sheltering tree was operating in a section of the city that is not zoned for that use.
Why the shelter was operating outside of the zoning, the only thing I can say is that 11 years ago, it was brought before the PZA and it was tabled, and the sheltering tree and others were supposed to get additional information and bring it back to the PZA. Basically, all we're doing is enforcing the existing zoning. There are other zones throughout the city that would fit well. So we are not saying, you can't provide those services in the city, but it needs to be an appropriate zoned area.
WNZF spoke yesterday with Sarah Eulis, a member of the Sheltering Tree Board, who said they have reached out to officials to enlist their help in finding a new suitable location so they can continue to help the homeless get their lives back on track. From the WNZF Newsroom, I'm John Arkin.
The Flagler County Sheriff's Office won't likely be expanding its force, at least not at Palm Coast's expense. Sheriff Rick Staley had asked for 6 new deputies to work high-demand hours in the city, but Palm Coast City Council seems to think the force can do without, since they added 5 deputies last year. Council members asked if it was 6 this year, how many it would be next year. Deputy Chief Mark Strobridge, who presented for Sheriff Staley, who was in Tallahassee, says the force needs about 40 more deputies to meet recommended staffing levels. Strobridge cautioned that just because crime is down doesn't mean now's not the time to act. He fears the sheriff's office could lose gains in the community. But council instead approved the proposed property tax rate, which will mean an increase in revenue for the city as property taxes rise. The final budget will be approved in September. A fight between neighbors ends violently in Palm Coast. Tony Magoo reports.
50-year-old Craig Murphy of 133 Berkshire Lane ran over his neighbor after they argued over who would mow Murphy's lawn. According to the Flagler County Sheriff's Office, Murphy and his neighbor were arguing over who would do it. The neighbor said he'd do it, but only if he got paid for his work. It all escalated from there. The neighbor told deputies that he and his roommates tried to calm things down, but Murdoch wasn't having any of it, got into his car. The neighbor said he tried to get Murdoch's attention by tapping on the car's rear window. Murdoch, who was yelling obscenities at the man, put the car in reverse and accelerated, striking the neighbor and dragging him underneath the car and into the swale in front of his house, in spite several witnesses who were shouting for Murdoch to stop the car. The neighbor was taken to Advent Health Palm Coast with head pain and severe abrasions on his back and legs. Murdoch, meanwhile, was charged with aggravated battery with a deadly weapon and posted $2,500 bail the next day. For Flagler's Morning News, I'm Tony Magoo.
In retail terms, a rollback might be a price cut, not the case in property taxing.
Flagler County Property Assessor Jay Gardner said that a rollback is a way for a taxing entity to get to zero.
So that rollback rate gives each taxing authority an adjusted millage rate that gives them the same money as the prior year.
Gardner said that property values are up now and the rate is rolled back. He said that in times when the property values are down, the rate is rolled up. Gardner said the millage rate for each municipality in the county is determined by the services that property owners demand. You can hear the full interview on the Free for All Friday podcast. You can find that at the Flagler Radio app. Download the Flagler Radio app today. From the WNZF Newsroom, I'm Deb Albertson.
And now you're up to date on Flagler's Morning News. I'm Amy Cherry.